Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Swords and Sandals. This time around we're going to be doing another well, but it's going to be tabletop size. Alright, well this is pretty self-explanatory, this little section here. I'm just going to use the template, as a means to just sort of mark off and measure everything. As opposed to, because basically the size of this thing, it's too small to really cut the stuff out and glue it to wood, so we can just use it as a reference. So I'm going to go through all of the pieces here and cut all the pieces before I start, even just a little bit. Now if you notice, I am not speeding this video up at all. It's this took me about three and a half hours to build the whole thing, start to finish. So I just sort of try to cut down the video as much as possible. Excuse me, can't talk today. I wanted to sort of get away from some of this time-lapse stuff. But anyway, I went through, cut all the pieces, and then went into a little bit of everything else. Now this is foam, me cutting a circle. I spent probably 15 minutes on this one piece alone just to try to make sure that it was right. You can see all the pieces up around the area there. So this sort of vinyl patch, no expansion, no shrink patch, I'm using it to line the outside of this well shape here just a little bit. Because it's so small, it's just going to be a little bit at a time. Very little, actually. I went over this quite a few times to make sure that it was thin enough. I used a normal sponge with a nice texture on it and made it damp just a little bit on the one side here, and I'm going to basically tap it on to this drywall patch just a little bit at a time and create this extra texture, which is going to inevitably, when I'm done, is going to look like creek rock. Now you want to wait and let the depending on the type of patch, let it set up just a little bit before you go ahead and do this texture. But you'll see here, yeah, there we go, there it is, nice instant rock pile. And depending on, as I say, depending on how what your sponge looks like, you want to make sure that you get a really nice texture on your sponge. So you might have to shop around, and they're all artificial, so everything's going to be, every one of them is going to be different. So you just have to shop around, maybe buy 5 or 6 of them just to be on the safe side. So this is the little ring that I have. I decided to make this one stone as opposed to wood, like the bigger 112 scale well. So I got to cut out the little notches, and this is, just to fit the wood that I use, which I believe is going to be 3/32. And oh boy, I had some time here. Super gluing these pieces together was kind of a nightmare. I don't think I've ever worked in something so small before. It was sort of hit and miss, hoping that my cuts were straight so nothing went off. I was putting a lot of faith in this process here, because this is actually the first time I'd done something, I think, this small in probably a long time, especially with wood. And this is all balsa wood, by the way. I just didn't have any base wood available, so I had to use balsa wood for everything. So I'm just using that foam as a base, so I don't actually super glue everything to my mat. This way I could just cut the foam if it stuck to it. But yeah, these little bitty pieces, it was really kind of complicated to try to film the stuff and then stay in camera, keep my eye line, straight, and then still be able to put this stuff on here without, gluing my fingers to the table. Yeah, you see there. And I think for the most part I did okay. I was really lucky, I think, because that's pretty straight. I think it was all to do because of making sure that the edges were cut specifically the way they needed to be. So absolutely straight all the time. And this one, you know, these little corner joints, I've tried to figure out a way to make this stuff easier and smoother to do, but I can't figure out a way. So it all has to be pieced together. So the template, when I made them, I see this is to compensate for the rafters, but in the template I made it to where you're just going to put the the support beam on the actual rafter itself. So if you decide you don't like that position, if your well is too big or whatever the case may be, you can just add to it a little bit. It's not really a big deal. And I wouldn't even add to the support. I would just put a little layer down on the little strip on the roof itself, and nobody's ever going to see it, especially something this size. But you know, wow, I sped this up super quick, and it just feels like everything is just, I'm going so slow. This is insane. I think this is the first time I've ever done commentary to something where it's all real time. I don't really have anything to say, which is surprising for me. Yeah, you know, this is kind of interesting. I think I'll just divert here while I'm moving super slow. This is crazy. I know I'm trying to be careful, but why in the world am I moving at sloth speed? My hand is slowly moving around. And I did realize that as I was moving stuff around on the table, my hand would cause a little wind and start blowing some of the balsa wood away. So maybe I'm trying to be careful about that. I don't know. So real quick here, these are all the pieces. This was a nightmare. If you want an easier way, cut out a single straight block of this wood. If you want to be meticulous like this, you know, and have the rafters and stuff like that, I wanted all of the different details. I also wanted to see what it would be like to actually build the stuff as if it were, you know, being built real scale. I may not do this again, especially for something that's so small and it's going to be underneath. But I do like the fact that you could pick up this well and take a look at every angle, and you're still going to see all the detail work and everything like that. So I do kind of appreciate that aspect of it. So this is just measured variations of like the 2x4 kind of situation. I just put little streaks and dots of super glue everywhere, and I'm doing this, well, I'd like to say I'm doing this super fast, but I'm still kind of slow at the whole thing here. I am throwing this kind of stuff up in the air a little bit because I don't want the cuts to match exactly. So I'm trying to do this. I do find out that basically I measured pretty well, and I ended up cutting all the stuff pretty straight. So now I put this, now that the two sides are together, then I put the little beam in the center. There we go. Little beam in the center just to help with the drying so it doesn't sink in while it's drying. I wait for the other two. Unlike the bigger one that I did where I started gluing them together before I put the supports in there. So I decided at this point I was not going to make a base like I did for the big well. So I needed to put a bottom on this well. So I just took the little core that I had cut out, like, I don't know, maybe a 1/16 or maybe an 1/8 of an inch off, and then I'm just going to super glue it back in there. And at some point here, I think I might show it. I'm not really sure. I don't show it right now. I'm eventually going to patch that up and fill in the gap, but not right now. So I'm just going to use this while that little cut there is drying. The bottom of the well is drying to sort of figure out where this is all going to go. And once I figure out where I'm going to sort of place the wood into the rafters, then I super glue it down. Inevitably, I ended up super gluing it down, not 100% straight. It kind of The supports kind of went out a little bit, but it's balsa and balsa bends. So, oh, here we go. There we go. I had patched. Yeah, I'm patching with the same sort of non-shrink patch and using the pencil there to kind of push it down onto the patch, so this way it's not up too much. This is a new wash that I made. I'm trying to be very, very subtle with the browns. Using a glass jar this time. Highly recommend a glass jar. But this is just me going through and getting all of it, just every single bit of the wood. Because even though the detail's there and the proportions are still there, it was pretty easy just to get the small brush into all of the little nooks and crannies. I think it's because of its size. You just splash it on and it pretty much will cover the whole thing, unlike the larger one. So because I'm not transforming this into wood, I'm going to go ahead and keep it stone. And so now I'm going to use this pencil to draw some generic little details, kind of like flagstone jetting from the center. So I'm going to do this for the top, the sides, and the bottom. I'm going to make them pretty deep too, because I kind of want this to stand out from the relief that's on the well itself. So I'm not really quite sure what it's going to look like when I was doing it, but I made the top thick and then the bottom one a little bit thinner, so just in case I had some options if it was a little too thick after I got it all done. So I Mod Podged, primed it, and then did a wash on it. As you can see, it's sitting there on the table, and though it's out of focus, this is me doing the wash on the well. I think that I didn't wait long enough. I'm not sure how this lightweight patch works to regular patch. I have had a lot more defined sort of flagstone pieces from this method, from regular drywall patch that has water in it, as opposed to this other stuff that's non-shrink and kind of feels like foam after it's all said and done. I'm not sure, but I think it still did a pretty good job overall. It just depends on your personal preference. I would recommend trying a few different types. So I'm just using this sort of gray black wash that I made to very subtle wash to just create some aging on the wood. Now we're gonna put shingles on this here in a little while, but I wanted to make sure that it looked good from the beginning to the end. And unlike the other one that I did, I wanted to make sure that I sort of painted the steps in between, so I didn't, paint myself into a corner. Not doing it all here. I'm just, the edges that look like rain would collect and kind of warp and stain the wood from there. That's kind of where I'm thinking. So here is my sort of random, non-measured, some thin, some thicker shingles that I'm cutting out here. It's 1/16 inch balsa wood here. 1/16 inch thick balsa wood. So the idea is that I'm just gonna, as I say, I'm just eyeballing all of this. I pushed these to the side because I used some stain to test the other side, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to use this or not. I didn't want the colors to be too off. So I just use as a basic eyeball scale here, and then start cutting some shingles. And essentially, I think I'm going to skip here just in a second, but I want you just to see that these are different lengths too. Some I cut in the middle, some I cut off on the sides. This is the big problem that I had here, as they're so small. Static was my enemy. And I just draw a line of super glue on the roof, and so I'm trying to work fast before the stuff sets up and dries. So I'm getting little pieces of little bits of glue on my tweezers, which is causing major problems. I don't have a solution. It's unfortunate. It's just the way it is, I think, and you're just gonna have to deal with it. But before I put each line on, I measure to see where the glue line's going to be. So obviously, I'm just about to finish up here on both sides. But if you're not comfortable with working this fast, with super glue, because I think by the time that I got the pieces of wood on, not even a second had passed, and they weren't possible to move. Once I stopped moving them, they were just stuck where they were. So if you're not comfortable with that, I'd recommend like maybe tacky glue, or just doing a couple at a time. But I only had one hand free, so that hand was placing and gluing at the same time. So I really couldn't get around it, and I tried to put something down, just sort of mount it, but I kept blocking the camera, so I really didn't have much choice from there. So let's see. Okay, so I started working on a little bucket for the well. I'm going to tell you right now, I made this out of balsa wood. No, basswood, so I can drill into it, and then I made the square and then cut around it. I really don't recommend using this method. I really don't. Just get a bead, just like a plastic bead. I didn't think about this until afterwards, and I'm just smacking myself in the head. Just get a plastic bead, get a little thin wire jewelry piece loop, and glue that loop to the bead, and then paint it. You're good to go. But no, I didn't do that. I took a small paper clip, I bent it, I took the piece of wood, I drilled it, I carved it up, I drew little marks into it, or cut little marks into the side for texture, and then I spent forever trying to get this thing to be glued down. And then once I glued it down, I had a hard time with this massive thick string that I ended up using, and so I had to thread the string first because it was too thick to thread once I had glued it down, so I had to pull it all back out. And I'm using what I thought was a relatively thin thread, string. It was unfortunately still way too big. I'm to the point where I think maybe fishing line would have probably been the best bet. Some sort of, braided fishing line. I'm not really sure. I'm not even sure they even have that kind of stuff. But once I get this on here, and once I got it, I was fine. It's just a little out of proportion for the scale, so who cares? I'm using a steel brush here, and I'm trying to, unfortunately this is the only camera angle I have because something happened to my top camera angle. But I'm just using it to create a bunch of distress in the edges of the wood. Something like where the water has drained off of it. It creates a little bit more, texture in the wood itself. And since it's balsa is really good about taking some extra texture. So makes it look really old. Did this for the top, obviously, and for the sides and the edges. And eventually here, once I'm done distressing this whole process, then I'm just going to stain it with the regular stain that I use for everything else. And because, see, I don't even show that in here. So now it's time to glue all this stuff together. So now I'm just taking a nice thick bead of glue, and I'm gonna, because of the way everything's positioned, I know this stuff's gonna squeeze when I do it, squeeze out. So I'm gonna try to pull this out a little bit. So just not enough to break it or anything, of course, but just a little bit so it doesn't touch the glue until I need it to. I don't want to have all the glue slide down. So I kind of raise it out so that I can do this. And because it was flaring out at the ends, I had to get like needle nose pliers to kind of hold the hold the wood down to the thing. And obviously it's squeezing out the bottom there. But this actually worked pretty well. And because it's balsa, it bent. If it was basswood, it wouldn't have worked. I would have ended up squeezing into the rest of the stuff itself. But with balsa, it kind of helped in both regards. So I wasn't going to make a handle for the well because of the size. I was unsure if it would work, and in hindsight, it really didn't work. I used basswood, but basswood was too small, and so I had to use a wider piece of balsa, believe it or not. And then I drilled the holes that I needed to, and then I just I trimmed the balsa down as much as I possibly could to sort of fit on there. Now the downside is that this is still way too big in scale. And you're going to see once I finally put it on here. This really should have been something metal, but I couldn't find anything, and I didn't want to carve all day long. This is probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning here when I'm doing this. So I finally get this piece on here, and it's a little larger, and it's obviously it's out of focus because I'm not paying attention at this point because I've broken the last 3. But you can see that it's bigger. It's bigger than it should be. But I'm okay with it, I think, because the rope is big and the bucket is tiny and the handle is huge. So it's almost kind of like this balance, I think. I don't know. Okay, well, that's another one under wraps. Please subscribe, do the bell, do all the social media stuff. Also, please go to my Patreon account. You can find the link below in the description. Go there, help me out, support me. You know, send me an email, drop me a line, give me some suggestions on what to build. So anyway, see you next time. Keep building.